Hey folks, it's me, David Stewart, your friendly neighborhood movie reviewer. Today I'm going to do a movie review and analysis of a movie you probably would not expect me to do. That is Oliver and Company, a 1988 animated Disney movie. Why am I doing this movie? Well, I watched it, so I might as well do a review on it. Why am I watching Disney movies from the 80s? Well, you guys know that I have a child, and it's okay to give your kids a little bit of screen time now and then. So we actually watched this movie over several sittings, actually, and I thought I'd give my thoughts on it. I know that Disney fare may not be exactly what most of my viewers are into, but I know that a lot of you have kids, so you might be thinking along those lines as well. But even if it's not what you're into, sometimes it's good to do a little bit of thinking outside of your regular sort of genre box that you tend to interact with and see what other genres offer, and to be able to look at a movie and see what works and what doesn't work about it, what things they did that made the movie effective, and what things maybe stopped it from being as effective as it could be. So I'm going to do my standard thing. I'll do a review and then I'll do a more thorough analysis after that and put sort of everything into context. So this is a cell animated movie made by Walt Disney and Company in 1988. It's called Oliver and Company, and it's actually very, very loosely based, and I think they said in the credits, inspired by Oliver Twist by Charles Dickens. It stars a couple of famous voices, including Billy Joel as Dodger the dog. Bette Midler is one of the dogs, and so is actually Cheech Marin from Cheech and Chong. It's in a Disney movie. I think that was his first. It might have been his first like animated feature. He plays a Chihuahua. And I say it's loosely or maybe like inspired by Oliver Twist because at some point I think the legend was like it was pitched as Oliver Twist with dogs. And some point between the pitch and like when the movie finally got made, the plot got reworked to the point where it really doesn't resemble Oliver Twist at all. But it's just kind of like loosely references it. And of course, the main characters are cats and dogs. They're not people. The story centers around Oliver the cat, who doesn't get adopted from a street side box and gets abandoned. Trying to find his way in the city. Essentially, he gets an offer from a dog named Dodger, played by Billy Joel, who actually does at least one of the musical numbers in this. And there's 5 or 6 sort of pop songs are the music in the movie. This cat runs into Dodger the dog. They steal some hot dogs together, and then Dodger decides to shaft the cat and runs off on his own. The cat follows him back to this boat where the dogs have a gang together. They're the gang, but then there's a human that comes in and feeds them, played by Dom Deluise. And actually, I think his performance is actually kind of effective for that character. He's supposed to be sort of the thief with a heart of gold, if you would. So Oliver falls in with Finn, and they sort of become his family. Then he also ends up getting sort of adopted by this rich girl in like an attempted theft gone wrong, as these dogs and cats try to make money. Their human is basically being threatened by this mob boss. He has a loan shark. He has to come up with a bunch of money, and that's sort of the setup for the plot. Now, if I'm going to give you like a really broad sort of judgment on the movie, I don't think it holds up all that well. And the reason that I don't think it holds up all that well, I mean, it doesn't hold up all that well compared to especially some of the movies that surround it, especially like Little Mermaid, which I think directly followed it as a cel animated Disney movie. And it doesn't hold up as well as like those like really old classic Disney movies, I think, in terms of its definitely its visual appeal and definitely its music. I think those are the two things that make it really not hold up the way that other Disney movies do. So first of all, the visual animation of it is just a little bit off. It ends up being a movie that's kind of in this odd transitional period. It was the first animated movie they made after Black Cauldron. And if you guys have never seen Black Cauldron, that might actually be, if you don't like Disney movies, that might actually be one of rather big interest, and almost like ruined their business because it was really unpopular and it just really missed their market. It was like originally rated PG-13 or R. because of like its very disturbing imagery. It's based on a book of novels by the Chronicles of Prydain, and then I'm trying to remember who. Christopher Lloyd, I think, is the person who wrote those, which I actually do like those books, and they're cool. And maybe I'll do another video just talking about them at some point. But that movie was a disaster. Like Black Cauldron was a disaster for Disney. The family friendly company, which is since transformed into like the Marvel Star Wars company as well, which is interesting. But back then it was definitely like the family friendly company, and so Black Cauldron kind of screwed it up. They really needed this movie, Oliver and Company, to be a hit and to really restore faith in the company, but also to sort of push them forward and see what they could change and revise to sort of find a better product. So it's an odd transitional movie. There's hints of what's going to be good in The Little Mermaid, but not enough of it, and there's still stuff remaining from their previous projects, which makes the overall quality of the movie seem a little bit less than those that surround it. So the quality of the visuals is a little bit low. Like the mouths don't quite line up with the movement of the faces, or the voices don't line up with the movement of the mouths very well with the animation, and sometimes in really awkward ways. And like you might forgive anime because it's like they have a face and just see like the lips doing this. But in this movie, there's these big dog jowls moving all the time, and it's like you see a dog jowl do like this, and there's like 20 words that come out, and you're like, what happened? It just looks a little weird. The backgrounds are of what I would consider, they don't match the cell animation at all, and they look actually usually pretty bad. They're mostly like watercolor backgrounds, but you can see the pencil lines underneath them. I think they made probably some bad decisions in designing the background frames for the cell animation, and they're also shot from like a dog's eye angle, which inherently makes all the angles look odd, and some of the animators especially had a hard time drawing the cars going by at that angle. So you see a car go by and it just looks really off. It just doesn't look like the perspective's right at all. So visually, it's got a lot of things that are off about it. It's also dark, and I watched it on a DVD, and that could be a problem with the DVD transfer. But overall, the movie is just not near as bright as I remember it when I was 5. Now, given that it's been like almost 30 years since I happened to have seen this movie, but I remember seeing it and thinking it was very bright and vibrant. So it could be the DVD transfer. It could just be that, my perceptions were different back then. But it's pretty dark. And so visually, it's just not as appealing as the stuff that sort of surrounds it. I think the big thing that makes it not hold up over time, though, is the soundtrack. I think the soundtrack is like really not very good. And the reason that it's not very good is that the pop songs I mentioned, it's got some pop songs. Billy Joel, who plays Dodger the dog, actually does some pop songs. I think Bette Midler might sing a song. I know Huey Lewis sings like the opening song, I think. And those don't hold up because that late 80s pop sound, it's kind of like having a disco soundtrack. It just isn't timeless at all. It really, you hear that trigger snare drum, it really sounds like the 1980s. And the songs just frankly aren't that good. It's not just that they have an 80s sound. The 80s production holds it back, where like things are kind of sparse, sonically sparse. They don't sound big and full like some of the stuff from the 70s. A lot of the stuff from the 80s has kind of a sparse sound to it, and the songs from this movie are no exception. So they sound a little thin. The voices are hard to understand. Sometimes they're slightly buried. They have a lot of effect on them, like reverb. But the songwriting on the songs themselves, they're very, very forgettable for the most part. There's a couple of good hooks here and there, like the opening song has a good hook. But mostly the songs just don't really come together nearly as well as they would in The Little Mermaid, which followed, and of course like Beauty and the Beast, which most people consider like one of Disney's best movies, at least musically and visually. So it's just the music just doesn't really work in 2017 at all. It feels like you're listening to disco music. It's the best way I could put it. That late 80s music just has a quality to it that is not timeless and just really doesn't hold up over time. Overall, the sound design as well is very, very flat and quiet. So usually you usually have flat and loud, not flat and quiet, but there's just only a couple moments that are loud. that are kind of odd, and they don't, like a car screeching away is all of a sudden louder like than anything imaginable in the movie. And that could also be a problem with the DVD transfer. I would acknowledge that, but I think it's probably just more a quality of the sound design in the 1980s, which was designed for movie theaters. You were still designing primarily for movie theaters, not the home theater market, and so movie theaters really crank up the sound. They have no problem with like a rather quiet transfer, and I don't really have a problem with the quiet transfer either. It's just mostly that things there's not as much fidelity. It's just it doesn't feel like a very full sounding soundtrack. The voices also sound a little bit I don't know, just not full tone, like a little bit lo-fi is the best way I'd put it. So overall, I think those things are really what holds it back. The story's okay. The characters are somewhat appealing. You don't spend very much time with sort of the auxiliary characters. They're sketched out very quickly, which is what you need in these Disney movies from this period. So all that kind of works together. The story's fairly compelling. You kind of see the twists coming, and things resolve as they should resolve. The action, when it's violent, is shown kind of off the screen, which may be important for those of you who plan on showing this to children. It is rather scary for children, in my opinion, and it also features prominently theft. So you may want to keep that in mind, is that it's got sort of the noble thief, the normal thief attitude, which, I don't know how accurate or appropriate that is for children, but it's there. So overall, like, the plot stuff works. So that's my sort of review of it. I don't know. I put it somewhere in the marginal thumbs down category, maybe like a C- or something like that. Simply because the music really just is not. I don't like it at all. I don't think it's good. Let's talk a little bit about the analysis stuff. I mentioned some of the technical things that sort of hold this back and the soundtrack. Let's talk about character setting plot. So the characters are Dodger the dog, who's sort of the helper to the main protagonist, which is Oliver the cat. Oliver the cat is trying to find his way in the world and find a home. He sort of finds a home with the gang, and then he finds a home he prefers more with a rich girl. And then the gang gets hurt by that because they need that like sort of family like bond so that they can feel like they're safe. But Oliver really wants a higher degree of safety and just a different life. So there's a little bit of character conflict there. The characters are pretty willing to just sort of resolve that conflict quickly, though, so it's not that big a deal. All the auxiliary characters are sketched really quickly and really accurately, and I think they're actually sketched well. So you have like Francis the dog, the bulldog, who speaks with a British accent and is obsessed with Shakespeare and considers him, he's kind of hoity-toity. I don't know what a good term is. Kind of he's got a plum in his mouth, sort of posh bulldog living in a slum. You have Cheech Marin playing, I think the dog's name is Tito. It's a little chihuahua, and he just acts like a stereotypical Mexican. But he sketches himself out very quickly, and he's actually a good little source of comic relief. You have him sort of fall in love with this poodle that the rich girl owns. I don't remember the poodle's name. It's played by Bette Midler. And that dog is jealous, obviously, of the cat. So that's her only motivation, is that she's jealous of the cat, and she's like this prize-winning dog. So it's like arrogant dog, jealous of newcomer. And that's how quickly all those characters are sketched out. There's also Shakespeare, Einstein. Einstein, the Great Dane, and he's just his character is he's not too bright. That's why he's called Einstein. And that's as much character development as you get for the main animals. The human's name, for some reason, is I'm drawing a blank on it, but there's two humans. There's the big bad guy, the main antagonist, the loan shark, and then there's the poor thief, played by Dom Deluise. And his thing is somehow he owns a loan shark money, and yet he lives in like total poverty on a boat on the pier in Manhattan. And I'm not quite sure how that works at all. But anyway, he needed money, and so now he owes someone money. And this is always the weird thing about like loan sharks. It's like, give me your money or I'll kill you. It's always like the setup. It's like, that doesn't seem like a good way to recover your money, to me. It seems like there'd be some other better way to do it. But that's the setup for the plot. The setting is Manhattan, late 1980s. There's not much else to talk about it there. You know, it's a standard American dense urban setting from the perspective of animals, which are able to talk to one another, even if humans don't. We're not even really sure how much the humans understand them or if they understand them at all. That's the setting. So character setting. The plot is Oliver was trying to find that home I mentioned. He falls in with the gang after following Dodger back after Dodger screws him out of some hot dogs they stole together, and becomes sort of inducted into the gang. But then in a theft gone wrong, he ends up with, when they're trying to steal from this limousine at this rich girl, he ends up with her and she adopts him. That's where he wants to be. The gang comes and rescues him by breaking into the house, which, you know, then he's like, I don't really want to go. After they get him out, and they're like, we saved you from that. He's like, I didn't want to be saved from it. It's like, well, fine, you can go back on your own after they take it back to the hideout. And he's like, I don't even know where I am, you know. Thanks, Dodger. Thanks for saying I'm free to leave from this place where I don't even know how to get back to where I want to be. And then, you know, all that conflict, we don't even bother resolving it because we got to get back to the main conflict, which is that this guy needs to pay back the money. The guy comes up with this idea for paying back the money by ransoming the cat to the little girl. And, of course, like in the real world, that probably wouldn't work out. But she goes by herself. Like her parents aren't even in town somehow. She's being cared for by her butler. She goes to the pier, and then the guy sees that the little girl is the one who owns the cat, and he like has this change of conscience. And he says, I found the cat. Here's your cat. You don't have to give me any money. But before he can do that, comes the bad guy to kidnap the girl to ransom her. So the stakes go up. Now the dogs just forget about all that conflict they had about you don't want to be our friend anymore, Oliver. And they just get together and they go rescue the girl. And Disney also does this particular thing with the death of the villain. And they've done this in other movies as well. The villain isn't really killed by the protagonist. So the villain kills himself in the climax. That's what ends up happening. He kills himself because of his own like carelessness, so that the protagonist basically can leave the story with very clean hands, not having to have actually killed another person. It's just one of those tropes that Disney does. You know, the person slides off the precipice and dies. So in this case, the main antagonist, somehow he ends up on this train track, like on this bridge, and he gets hit by the train and he dies. And like all the, you know, Oliver and them, they just sort of barely escape. You know, they barely escape from the car exploding on this train track. So overall, I mean, the plot, it's pretty loose. It's a pretty loose plot. It's not the best plot, but it's better than a lot of really, really cut down, edited plots. And one thing is that the editing is really not too bad in this. There's enough time for you to see and appreciate what's in front of your eyes. So that's sort of what you get with that. You do need to be like aware of the Disney tropes, that you have a lot of scenes that just exist to tell you what a character is. You know, you have Francis watching Shakespeare, and that interaction just exists to tell you who he is, rather than having it directly influence the plot. The characters in Disney movies almost never reveal themselves through the plot, and I'm not sure if that's something that they know about younger audiences that like I don't know. Is that kids need just like direct characterization. They need like direct character exposition, and not so much having characters show who they are through their actions of the plot. So, and maybe it's because they have really simplistic plots, and then maybe they have enough room to do that sort of thing. But that's more or less what you're going to get with it. You're going to get the like direct character exposition, and then some of the tropes like you avoid showing the violence, and the bad guy kills himself at the end because it's better for him to die because of his own his own vices, rather than have to have the protagonist kill him, which might be, maybe back then they thought it was too extreme for children. But there you go. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know what you want to see down below, especially if it's a video on the Mandela effect. I'll talk about other things from the 80s with the Mandela effect too, I'm sure. You guys have a great day. You can visit my websites, dvspress.com, davidvstewart.com. Do I have a copy of the book to show? I don't think I do. By Muramasa Blood Drinker. Links are down below. And I appreciate it, as always.